Welcome back to the I'm Fine podcast, honest discussion about mental health issues and maybe some tips and things as to how to make your life a little bit better and make suffering with mental illness or helping another suffering with mental illness a little bit easier. I'm here again with Melanie McGregor, and we're going to talk a little bit about demystifying or just talking about the reality of anxiety, what it's like to suffer with it, and how that can be different with different people. And depression. And so let's talk about that. I'll start with myself. It's kind of hard to explain to folks who don't suffer with anxiety what it actually is like to suffer with it, because I think the broader public view of it is, oh, you're nervous, or you're just shy, but it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think sometimes people will think, well, I remember feeling nervous before a job interview or before I went on a date or, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, I understand exactly what you feel like. And there's a real difference between feeling anxious and having an anxiety disorder. Now, anxiety is a completely normal emotion. Sure, maybe it doesn't feel very good, but, very normal for any of us to feel anxious at any given time over anything. But often what we will see with our kind of typical anxiety is you're anxious about something, you deal with whatever that something is, and then that anxiety goes away. What we tend to see with anxiety disorders is that anxiety tends to go on for a longer period of time. It's more overwhelming, so the anxiety is more severe, and it has a disruptive effect on your day-to-day life. So if I have, a job interview tomorrow, I'm probably going to be a little nervous about it. Maybe I don't sleep so well tonight, but, long term, it's probably not going to have a disruptive impact on my life. But if it goes on for longer, for example, I know you had shared, you were having difficulty sleeping for a longer period of time. I said I was having difficulty focusing at work for a longer period of time. So it's going to have a disruptive impact on our day-to-day lives. Are we able to do the things that we want to do, or is that anxiety getting in the way? And if there is that disruption, it may be that there's something more significant going on. It might not mean that we necessarily get a diagnosis, but what it may mean is, there's something that could use some additional attention here. Maybe we need to manage this in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and let's be clear that anxiety isn't something that I've learned. Anxiety isn't something necessarily that you have. It's not like a disease or something you catch. It's who you are. So there is both a negative side, obviously, when it becomes disruptive to your life, but there is a positive side to it too, where you can sort of lean into that part of you as a strength. I know with myself. And it's hard to do. I mean, you have to learn over time, and it'll take different amounts of time for everybody. But it's easy to focus on the negative when you first get diagnosed. I know myself trying to put words to what I was feeling. I mean, the only way I could do it was to anthropomorphize almost what my anxiety was. And it was like there was this darker side of myself in the back of my head that was screaming at me all the time. It was screaming at me just negative stuff. You can't do this. You're not good enough. You're not going to be able to do this right. You're going to screw it up. And it just went on and on and on. And it was the only way I could explain it to my wife was it's like noise. It's like the world becomes incredibly loud, and I can't shut it off. And particularly during the pandemic, it was really bad. Because there was so much anger in just publicly in the world. Masking, anti-masking, vaxxing, anti-vaxxing, everybody was screaming at each other. And I think anxiety sufferers really feel that in a really palpable way. I had to shut off the TV. I stopped watching TV. I stopped watching the news because it just felt like everybody was screaming at each other. And then that trailed off into public. Even though everything seemed fine, it just still felt like the world was loud, and then trying to shut that off. Now that's where medication helped me, and let's be honest with this as well. Medication isn't going to make it perfect. It's not a happy pill. And thankfully, I mean, my family doctor, I was his first patient as a baby, so he was like an uncle. He was like a family member to me, so we could have honest conversations about it. And he said, it's going to probably take the edge off, but you're still going to have to work at it, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, and I'm sure this is true of everybody. If they're prescribed a medication to help, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to all of a sudden make you feel like the way you think you should feel.
Often when we know medication isn't, sometimes people are afraid to talk about what they're experiencing because, well, that means that I'm going to be on medication. And often people have stigma or beliefs or feelings about medication. Not everyone who struggles with their mental health is necessarily going to need medication. That's an option, one of many. But even if someone does choose to take medication, yeah, it's not like, oh, you're going to wake up tomorrow and everything's going to be gone. It can take a little bit of time for that medication to have an impact. And often what it can do is it may help you manage those symptoms. It can reduce those symptoms enough that you may be able to do other things to cope. And I remember, I choose to take medication as well for my anxiety disorder. And I remember the first day that I actually felt, wow, like something is different here. And it was when I went with my family to see the Blue Jays play. And I remember looking at the field and thinking, wow, this field is really green. Yeah. And that's such a, it's such a small thing that you might notice, but it was like, it sounds really cheesy to say, wow, colors look brighter, or I feel a lot more present, but that was exactly it. I felt like for me, it took away some of that cloud, that anxiety or that fog that anxiety had put. And when I was able to focus a little bit better, then I could think about, okay, so now what can I do? What are some other things that I can do to cope with my wellness? So it's not just the medication. Sometimes people say, oh, it's a quick fix, it's a Band-Aid, but these are health conditions just like any other. We wouldn't say to someone who has diabetes, okay, well, you don't actually need that insulin, that if this is part of managing that health condition, then that's part of managing it. But it's what are the other things that we're doing as well?
Yeah. I know when I started taking it, and again, thankfully, my doctor was very good about it. He and unfortunately, it's not true for everybody, but he said it will take time. He said it'll be probably a couple weeks, maybe even a month before you start feeling a difference. But for me, it was like being able to take that voice or that darker side of me in the back of my head, throwing him down a hallway and putting him behind a locked door. And I explained it to my mom because she was really concerned about me. And I said, he's behind a door, but he's still there. I can still hear him screaming, but I can at least move further down the hallway now so I can focus and do other things. For me particularly, the most palpable change, like you were saying, like the field seemed greener, things. My thing was I always said no to everything. Out of my anxiety for my kids and things, if they asked to go do something and I got my anxiety flared, I was like, no. Whereas afterwards, I was like, yeah, okay. And I could actually, it allowed me to sit back and almost objectively look at my anxiety when it would flare and recognize it and be like, that's in my head. It's not in your head. Go for it. Right. And that's a huge change for me. Cause I mean, anything, any public, get together, a party, getting together with friends is like, oh, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? I just felt more comfortable in my own home or right. So yeah, I mean, it can be so challenging. I mean, for you, talk a little bit more about, how your anxiety manifests. Like, do you have a similar story or a different story? I know sound sensitivities can be a thing.
With me, I found I sort of describe it as my thoughts become, you talked about, the guy in your head yelling at you. I found that my thoughts would become really big and really kind of overarching. So let's say, we're doing our interview here and let's say I misspeak and, I have to go back and correct myself. Well, now I'm at a good place in my recovery. I can say, okay, well, I corrected myself. But when I was really experiencing a lot of my symptoms, it would be, oh my gosh, I'm an idiot. Chris hates me. He's never going to invite me back. My boss is going to think I'm stupid. They're never going to want me to represent CMHA again. I'm going to get fired. Like everything would just escalate so quickly. Like I would go from 0 to 1,000,000 in, 2 seconds. So now I definitely, I will get anxious, just like it's normal for people to get anxious. So if I have something that, I'm feeling anxious about, I can recognize what is the difference between being anxious about whatever this is and what is that big kind of disordered anxiety. I can recognize the difference between those two things. So if it's, okay, yep, I'm anxious about this project that I have to work on. What can I do? Why am I feeling anxious? What is going to help me cope? Can I plan? Can I manage my time? Whereas if I get those really big thoughts of, oh, I'm thinking I'm an idiot or that I can't do it and I'm stupid. Okay, now what do I need to do to deal with those thoughts? Do I need to make an appointment with a counselor? Do I need to do some extra self-care? So it's recognizing, I think that's part of what you learn when you live with anxiety or other disorders is how can I recognize what my triggers are? Like kind of where does this start and what can I do to hopefully head that off as quickly as I can?
Yeah. And I mean, as well, so just so we're not talking just about anxiety, but a lot of times what comes with hand in hand with anxiety, or anxiety is kind of a mild form of depression. And that can have even its own, like you said earlier, it can compound the problem even more, right? And it is, I mean, growing up, I was guilty of saying to folks or thinking about folks if they said, oh, I just couldn't get out of bed. It's very easy to say, well, just get out of bed. Mm-hmm. But until you've suffered it, until you really feel the symptoms of being frozen, where you just cannot move forward. You're stuck in a thought spiral, or your mind is racing and you just can't conceive of being anywhere except in bed, staring out the window and not doing anything. You are frozen. It's a real paralysis. Yep. So let's talk briefly a little bit about that, just so that, because I think it's okay to say to folks it's okay.
Yeah.
Because that's really I heard a psychologist say that's really your body's way, your mind's way of saying, I need to heal. And it is a coping strategy. I know it can be disruptive, but let's talk a little bit about that.
It kind of comes down to recognizing, okay, like what am I feeling and what do I need right now? And it's, yeah, I definitely heard, similar things. Well, if you're feeling anxious, like just don't feel anxious, just think positive. Yeah, and it's like, okay, I never thought of that, it's not that easy. But I think it's really paying attention to what are all the signals that you're getting. Like, when it comes to what could be signs that someone may be experiencing declining mental well-being, really it's any change in our normal way of being, whether that's in how we feel or how we think or how we're acting or like addictive behaviors or relationships or anything like that. It could be any change. So maybe there's one day that we wake up and think, I just do not have the energy to get out of bed today. So, okay, then maybe we choose to stay in bed. But then I think the question is, what happens after that? Does that help, or is it, okay, this is something that's going on for longer. This isn't my usual way of being. Hey, I'm isolating from people. I'm not participating in activities that I used to participate in. My regular coping strategies for this kind of thing isn't happening. They're not working. I'm feeling disconnected from people. It's affecting the way I'm functioning at work, or, even day-to-day tasks like getting out of bed, taking a shower, cooking, taking care of our families, all those kinds of things. So I think it's really paying attention to, okay, yep, maybe I will spend this one day in bed, and hey, maybe that's what I needed to cope. But then if things start going on for a little bit longer, then that's maybe a time to think about, okay, what else is going on here, and what are the next steps maybe that I need to take to get some support. And
let's quickly acknowledge as well, like how difficult this is for loved ones and family members and friends as well. I know, and we were talking about it in the break, how for my wife, I recognize how difficult it is for her to want to fix the problem, and I think that's true of any loved one, but they can't. And having to come to terms for them, having to come to terms with that, this isn't something that they can fix, but it's actually the best thing they can do is just sort of be there, because it's not something you can understand unless you have it. And it's even more difficult for the person who has it, or is struggling with it rather, to verbalize and put into words what it is exactly they're feeling, because they're just as confused as the loved one, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's important that that everybody has an open conversation with their loved ones, whether it's a parent, whether it's even a best friend if you don't want to talk to a family member, or if it's a spouse, particularly if it's a spouse, and even talk about it with your kids if you have kids. I think the most important thing that I can do for my own kids is to tell them exactly what's going on in simple terms. Say, I've had conversations with my boys saying, you know what, my problem is my mind races. It's not you, but sometimes I can get stuck and I can sort of be a little bit checked out, and it's not you. And it's really, I'm just struggling with my own thoughts today, but that's okay, right? And if you guys ever have that problem, you can talk to me, or we can go and talk to somebody. It's all right? Normalizing it.
Sure.
Because I think kids are getting better education than we ever did.
Oh, for sure. I know. Like my son, he's 13 and he'll talk about, we talked about this mental health wise, or we talked about whatever, it's amazing, because that certainly didn't happen when I was younger.
Right. I mean, my boys, I was shocked to hear that they were learning about meditation and yoga and having conversations at school, which I think is absolutely amazing. But I think it's definitely got to be reinforced by the parents. If there is a parent who's struggling, talk to your kids. Don't hide it, because hiding it can be more damaging.
Yep. And knowing that, we all want to fix it for our loved ones, especially our kids, is I want to make this go away. But, if kids are saying, hey, this is how I'm feeling, it's an opportunity for them to learn some coping strategies as well. So even, saying, wow, it sounds like you're having a hard day. What do you think would be helpful? Like help them learn to cope with it. That can definitely serve them well as they grow up. And, that's something that they can build on.
Yeah. And just to be clear as well, we've talked a lot about some of the negative things that can come about from anxiety, and I'll just say this to wrap it up quickly, but there can be a positive side to it as well. Like I said earlier, like we were discussing earlier, it's who you are. So there can be a positive side of, I know my anxiety keeps me sharp for what I do in media. I've thought about it at length in the very recent past, actually, about where my anxiety acts as a strength is that media, I have to plan for lots of things. There's always got to be a contingency plan to make sure a production goes well. So, I think folks with anxiety are great planners. They're great managers. They do very well at this, and that's one of those strengths. So don't be afraid to lean into your anxiety disorder and listen to it and what it's telling you.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, listen to it, have that insight into what works for me. What are my signs maybe when things are, kind of getting a little off the rails, but it's part of who you are, and that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast with me. Hopefully we'll have you back in again and we can talk about some other things. But thank you for joining us for the I'm Fine podcast. Hopefully there's been some helpful tips here, some helpful information, to particularly if there's a loved one in your life who you think might be suffering with anxiety. But on the simpler level, it's just broadening the conversation, bringing it out into the open, normalizing it, and knowing that there's a lot of people out there struggling day to day, and just be kind to each other out there. Everybody's got their own independent struggle that they're dealing with daily.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us. I hope you'll tune in next time, and we'll see you again.